Howdy do, neighbor. It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
Hey, folks, it's time for another episode of Berean Spirits on the YouTube and all the social medias. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ here in Springfield, Missouri. We've got Richard Dodson with the Kearney Church of Christ, as always, large and in charge. How you doing, Richard?
I'm doing good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Enjoying the beautiful weather of Kansas City?
Early spring, isn't it?
Yeah. Real early.
Yeah, it is.
I can't remember a February like this.
Well, I'll take it. I'm not giving it back.
I hear that. It's been beautiful. No doubt about it. Yep. So we got Josh Thornhill with the Brookmead Church of Christ down in Johnson City, Tennessee. Josh, how's it going down there?
It is going. I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Hanging in here.
I'm glad to hear that. Anything special going on? Any special requests or anything you got going on, Josh?
No, not really.
No,
nothing.
Oh man. Well, we've got an interesting show, I think, for you today, because we're going to talk about the fact that people are watching and what that means for us as Christians. And so we're going to jump right into it because, again, this is a topic that I think sometimes we lose track of, and we lose sight of the fact that there are those who are looking at what we do and how we do it for different reasons. A lot of times, as the scriptures point out, both in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12, as well as chapter 4, there are those who are watching and looking and speaking evil of us, and yet, they will see the things that we do and try to find something wrong with them. That would be the one idea, the one category of people. And then there are those who are genuinely looking for something better than the life they're living. And they're looking at everyone trying to find out, what kind of life, what or who has the kind of life that I desire, that I like, that I need. And so those are a few things. And then there are those who are just kind of the people watchers who just kind of at a glance see things that are happening, that, things that we do get their attention. And so there's various, I think, ways and types of people that are looking at us, various reasons why they are looking at us and watching us. But nevertheless, it is something that we've got to be aware of. And it should affect, in a sense, how we go about doing things. But Richard, before we get into that, first of all, whether people look at us or not, right? I mean, while it should have an effect, it should, cause us to think about what we do and how we do it. Even if we're by ourselves, aren't we being watched?
Oh, yes. God is always watching. The eyes of God are everywhere. So you shouldn't ever think you're not being watched. God is, we're going to give an account to him. He even gets into our thoughts. He's in there looking around, so, you can't escape, you can't escape eyes, and especially the all-seeing eye. You can't escape that. And one thing I did want to point out is there are those looking for inconsistencies in our life. We preach Jesus and him crucified. And for many, they think, well, that's just too good to be true. Because sometimes in our preaching, they will be convicted of something and they don't like seeing that. And so they will look for an inconsistency in how you apply things. And I've seen that with many people, inconsistencies. that's one of the things we really have to be on guard about, because, and that's something that can help us when inconsistencies are pointed out. And what I mean by inconsistency is I'm talking about, when we show judgment in one sense toward one thing, but then in another thing, we don't show the same type of judgment, and it's inconsistent. And people will point that out and say, "Oh, you're a hypocrite. You do this with this person, and you don't do this with another person." And so it's something that we really have to be on guard for, is to be consistent, not in just the way we treat people, but in our judgments. How do we determine, right from wrong from the Bible? We can't go to the Bible to say, hey, this is wrong because, and then we come to another topic and say, well, I know that's what took place on that topic, but we were looking at it differently this way. That's inconsistent, and people see that, and that turns people off. I just thought I'd throw that out there by way of introduction.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I really fear all the time with people watching, because my children were really good at finding inconsistencies. And in fact, there was times I thought, they're like an inconsistency detective. They just walk around snooping around all the time looking for things that are not, consistent. And I think any parent's seen that and had that experience. But the thing is, that doesn't stop. The world is out there doing that. And so, we really have to be on guard for that, and to make sure, that we are consistent in our judgments.
Yeah. And when kind of along those lines, not only are people looking for that, but that, Josh, is often an excuse that people use. They look around and they see, some of the things that people are doing around them. They see the sins that they're involved in, some of the things that morally, they, as you look at a neighbor, you think I'm morally a better person than they are, and so they kind of use that as a standard, and say, well, I'm doing better than they are, so why would I, what kind of changes would I need to make? They're the ones that need to make those changes, and so sometimes we get caught up in that aspect of things as well. Not only looking at and examining those around us and judging ourselves, or comparing ourselves by ourselves, but the world does that as well. And while it isn't necessarily the right thing to do, as Richard pointed out, kids see everything, it would seem. um but the most important thing, I think, to point out is we're not to be that standard, but nevertheless we're being used as a standard because we claim to follow the standard. And so that's really where yeah, I guess where the discussion can lead to.
Yeah, and I guess you could think about what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1, imitate me as I also imitate Christ. We are supposed to be representations of the standard, but we're not perfect ones. And that's where a lot of folks, tend to, discount our faith as a result of that. Several years ago, there was a football coach who, and I guess I didn't really hear anything. I didn't really hear him speak much, if at all. But apparently he was quite outspoken about his faith. And then it came out that he had been doing inappropriate things. And I remember the media running with that and saying, oh, he was proven a fraud. Or several years ago, when this whole homosexuality agenda was being pushed heavily, there was a county clerk who refused to give marriage licenses to same-sex couples.
Yeah, they're in Kentucky. Yeah.
And she was kind of doing it to preserve the sanctity of marriage, and then people were looking at her life and realized that she's been married 3 times. And you're just kind of like, if marriage is really that sacred, then why have you entered in that covenant 3 separate times? Yeah, and so they're going to be looking for those things to tear us down. They're looking for those things that indicate that we aren't perfect representations of the standard. But again, that, you know, I think they don't understand either, you know, what's the process of sanctification. You know, we are being sanctified, but that doesn't mean we're perfectly holy at any point, any given point. And what we're trying to do is to purify ourselves more and more each and every day, and to be closer to the perfection standard that has been set before us by Christ. And so, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to do things that we shouldn't. We're not going to perfectly represent what Jesus would do, but you know, and I think if there's times where we do fall short in that, we can own up to it, and we can at least acknowledge to the people who may have saw it that, you know what, that wasn't right. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have acted that way. And I think that goes a long way, or it should at least go a long way in building some credibility for yourself.
And, you know, Richard, there's the aspect of avoiding every appearance of evil. And one of the things with that particular text that I think it's important for us to point out, and even kind of along the lines of what Josh was saying, we can't help what people think, right? I mean, they're going to watch us. They're going to form their opinions, their judgments, and we can't help what they think, whether or not they assign motives to us that are right or wrong. We can't help that. But because we can't help that, right? All the more careful we have to be.
Well, I think we can help that by not being a hindrance to the gospel. Now, I agree with Josh that, you know, from time to time we fail, but they can also see us repent. And, you know, when we repent, that's part of preaching the gospel. I mean, we show the world that, hey, you know, you can mess up and you can make things right with God and you can get back in the saddle again. So we can do that, and we can teach people that by practicing that. I think all too often the problem comes is when we don't practice that. In fact, we actually try to justify the error that we took part in. And when that happens, yeah, they're seeing it. And unfortunately, they're not going to let you get away with a lie because, you know, in their mind, they're thinking nobody can be this good. You know, that's their whole thing. There's something about the gospel that's holding them back. And they're like, nobody can do this. Nobody can be obedient to Jesus. And, you know, that, which is not true. So we can be obedient to Jesus. That doesn't mean we're not going to fail from time to time, but part of obedience is repenting. Part of obedience is asking for forgiveness. And so when we do that, they can see this, knowing that it is part of the gospel, and we can influence, you know, their thoughts on this. That we can show them that it is possible for them to be able to be obedient to Jesus. In fact, we got an example of that in, I think, in 1 Corinthians 14, when it talked about the church coming together, and there was a visitor that they had in verse 23. And because of their preaching and their practice, you know, he worshiped God because of them. And so they did influence him for good. And we can do the same if we are obedient to Jesus.
Yeah. So let's get to some of the motives that people are looking. And let's first of all, if I can kind of guide the discussion in this direction, people want right now, and while it's always been the case, especially as we are going through it, they want to discount and discredit the gospel and anyone claiming to follow Christ, to follow God, to be a Christian. They're doing everything they can to discredit it. And while that's not new, we're the ones who they're looking at, right? We are the ones that they are looking at, trying to find something to give them justification or a reason to deny God or to not follow the gospel of Christ. And that really puts a very serious responsibility, I think, on us in what we say and what we do, obviously. Whether it's in recreation, in work, and online, on social media, wherever it is, there are those who are looking, they want to cry foul, right? They want to cry hypocrites. They want to cry out, that if that's the way a Christian lives, then I don't want any part of it. Um, and some are going to do it regardless, right? Some are going to do it even when what we're doing is right and the best possible way to do it, because they don't like it. They don't want the truth. They love the darkness. That's a part of it. But nevertheless, we are under that scrutiny. Josh?
You're muted.
Must not have been important to say.
I guess not.
Like we mentioned with that football coach, the people want us to fail, especially if we're outspoken about our faith. They want to see us fail. If they don't want to submit to the truth of the gospel, then they certainly want to see us fail, that we're nothing more than a fraud, that we're not, we're not even living up to what we claim. And so, why should they? And it kind of gives them justification. Like, even if these Christians are like this, then maybe I'm not that bad. I don't know entirely, but it goes to impress upon us kind of what you were alluding to there, just how important it is that we keep our example in the forefront of our minds. You think about a couple of Old Testament examples. David, because of his sin with Bathsheba, he's told that he gave occasion to the Gentiles to blaspheme God. And so because of his sin, he allowed the opportunity for those who weren't faithful to God to, kind of embolden themselves in their rebellion. And I mean, we need to be careful that we're not doing that very same thing. But then also, I think about Daniel in Daniel chapter 6, when the contemporaries of Daniel are trying to entrap him with something. I mean, they're searching far and wide to find something to accuse him of, and they find nothing. And so they have to set a trap for him in order to be able to accuse him of anything. And so you have those two ideas, and Jesus says that we are the light of the world. We're not to hide it under the bushel, but set it on the lampstand so that it can light the whole room. We are, to live our lives in such a way that we're not giving the enemy any opportunity to blaspheme, that those who speak evil of us may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say against us, Peter says. And so it's a responsibility, and it's difficult to always be on and to always say or try and say and do the right things, especially when, maybe you're having a bad day, your temper's not quite where it ought to be, whatever it may be. It's difficult, but we need to remember that we're trying to represent Christ. And as the song goes, let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. Even while he was, scorned and reviled, he didn't threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. So,
Yeah. And Richard, one of the obstacles that is difficult for us to overcome, and maybe you've got some wisdom you can impart for us and the audience as well. You have the world looking at people who are not Christians that claim to be Christians, right? This past Super Bowl, there was a bunch of big hype about, oh, we've got these Christians, that are playing in the Super Bowl just because they claim, right? They give thanks, they give glory to God, and then the next few days after that, they're drunk, and it's public intoxication, and it's obvious, that and people are looking at that. Is that what a Christian is? And for instance, Sunday afternoon, we go out to eat lunch, and someone in front of us wearing a suit, dressed up nice as though they just came out of some type of worship service, and they're rude to their server, they're rude to the restaurant workers. And then we tried to build a rapport with our waitress, and they're like, listen, I've had enough church people right in here. And so it creates a terrible obstacle that we have to try and overcome.
Yeah, it does. But, it's kind of like, that show Antique Auction or Antique, can't remember what they
Roadshow.
call it. Yeah. Where they bring things in and people look at it, experts look at it. And, sometimes those things are fakes.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things are real. And the person's able to show, the expert's able to show, this is what you look for. This will show you that it's a fake. And, that's exactly what we need to be doing. Not in the sense of, well, that person's a fake, he's just wearing a suit. But, by our example, that Josh was talking about, when we put forth the right example, even our doubters, are going to be able to look at us and say, wait a minute, this guy's different. He's not arguing with me. He's not getting mad at me. Maybe this one is the real McCoy and maybe the other one's artificial. And that's what we always have to strive for, is to make sure that, we come across as the real deal. And we can do that if we, set our minds to obeying Jesus, and to understand that our example is one way in which we preach. And we're going to be judged by how we preach. And we go back to that lady in 1 Peter 3 who was able to convert her husband, who was a non-believer. She never even said a word, but through her example, she converted him. And we can do the same, even even with these fakers, we can be the real deal, and people are going to see that.
Yeah.
I think God's going to make sure they see it.
Yeah. Good job, Richard. I'm impressed with your analogy. That's a great one. Showing the authenticity and the genuineness of what a true Christian is, it will come through. It will be seen and recognized, and whether they want to see it or recognize it or not, right? Sometimes people just have to give credit. And Josh talked about Daniel earlier. They looked and like, man, what do we say? Right. So they had to create a law, right, that would use his faith against him. And so that, I think that just goes to show how, the struggle is real, right? I mean, how difficult, but how serious it is, why we need to do our best to self-examine and make sure that what we're doing and what we're saying, how we're saying it, how we're doing it, is in line with the scriptures, because we don't always know that there are those who are watching us. Sometimes we don't see them. They're kind of hid, or they're not aware that anyone is looking or watching. And, I think kids are a great example of that as well. But unless you got something else on that aspect of looking, I want to move to the next one, if you guys are all right with that.
Well, we got a couple of
I
comments.
was just impressed.
Go ahead. Well, real quick, Josh, and then go to the comments, Richard.
All right.
I was just impressed that his analogy didn't have to do with food.
Oh man.
I'm going
See, Josh fell short, right? He's
did
not
fall
being the
short.
best example.
He's being cruel to a brother.
That's right.
He is not being Christ-like. He needs to repent and do things right. So we're
But it was
waiting,
funny.
Josh.
But anyway, go ahead.
All right. Josh's father, who heard him say that cruel thing, who I'm sure did not raise him that way, but nonetheless, he acts that way. Josh's father, Thomas Thornhill, says, in dealing with our influence in the world, the sad reality is there are two groups. One like Josh, who is genuinely looking for something to consider, and the other is looking to condemn. That's the group like Josh. And then he goes on to say, our job is to let our light shine regardless, which is what I'm trying to do for Josh. 1 Peter 2:11 and 12, and then chapter 3:15 through 17. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
It's nice to have one Thornhill on the show that's reflecting Christ.
Absolutely. Yeah. and Thornhill, the elder, can be seen on what's the show?
Truth Factor.
Truth Factor. That's right. Search for Truth Factor.
It comes on right after this.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so you can look for Thomas Thornhill and others on Truth Factor. If you starving for more of those with the Berean spirit. So is there more comments though, Richard, or?
No, that's good. We got those in. So
all right. So, and this actually goes to Thomas's comment. We've kind of looked at though and talked about those who are wanting to condemn something. That's just what they're looking for. But then there are those who are genuinely looking for the truth, right? They're looking for that authenticity. They want that in their life. And that is where really the consistency comes in, right? Because we shouldn't have to change our life. We're not supposed to change our life to suit one over the other, which is part of what Richard started off with, is that consistency in our conduct, in our speech, because we can live a life of consistency. And while there are those who are looking for something wrong, we're going to also find those that are looking for the truth and looking for a better life. And they'll be able to see the example that we are following and know it and follow after that as well. We can lead them to Christ. Richard already brought up 1 Peter 3:1-7 with the wife who has an unbelieving husband. But I mean, there's all kinds of examples where that is taking place. Paul in prison and the Philippian jailer in Acts 16, right? I mean, that was another great example of, someone who saw the example of Paul and Silas, and when his life was, even him willing to take his own life, you realized there was something better. Go ahead, guys.
I'm trying to remember. Was it Philip? I think, yeah, John. All right, I found it. I'm thinking about Philip Nathaniel. When Philip, came to Nathaniel and said, "We found, Jesus of Nazareth," and Nathaniel, who was a skeptic, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And he says, "Come and see." And that was what he told him to do. Is I'm doing this by memory, but that was it. What it come and see? I think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the life that Jesus was living and the things that he was saying that was able to convince them that this was the Son of God, and nothing has changed with that. Yes, John 1:46. Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said to him, "Come and see." And so that's when Jesus said, to Nathanael, there's no deceit in him. And so, yeah, he went to look. And so that's what we have to understand is there's going to be those who already believe, and they're going to be telling people, "Come and see Jesus." And how do they do that? Well, many times they do that by saying, "Come to church." And you can, hopefully see Jesus at church by the way that people are living and worshiping and hearing the message. And so, it's a come and see kind of thing. And so people who are seeking many times will come, as we already pointed out in 1 Corinthians 14, and they can be convicted by what they see. They see that type of respect for God's word, so that the people are wanting to be like Christ. They're wanting to be obedient, and that can attract people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that might be a pretty good example, Philip Nathaniel.
Sure. Acts chapter 10 with Cornelius. Here he was a devout man and he had a good report even among the Jews while being a Gentile. And yet, when he sent for Peter and Peter came to his house, who did he gather together? And who was willing to gather together with Cornelius? Because it wasn't just his family, right? I mean, he had those who were under him as far as the, being in the military, soldiers that were there in his house with him to listen because of the example that he set. And and here he was, you know looking and seeking after the truth, and leading others to do the exact same thing. Josh?
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, certainly. There are people that are seeking all around us. We might not realize it, but some of the smallest things we might be able to do uh, can make an impact. Um, I remember when I was in high school, um, there was a guy in one of my classes who asked, he was just like, "Why are you always so happy?" And I wasn't quite sure how exactly to answer that, but it's like kind of like I didn't really have any reason not to be happy. I didn't have a lot of the brokenness of the world around me, and that apparently made quite a bit of difference in my disposition around people. Um, and that guy particularly noticed it, I guess. I heard another story about a woman who would every day go to the same restaurant, and she would be very friendly with the workers that were there. And she'd get her food, and then she'd go and sit down and read her Bible. And then after a while, there was a worker that somebody that started working there, and their life was just a mess. And the people says, "Why don't you go talk to this lady over here?" And so she did, and ended up obeying the gospel. And at the time that story was told, was a faithful member of the church at that time. And I haven't had any updates, but I would assume and hope that that would be the case still. But um, I mean, just something simple for people who are looking. They see something different. You think about people who have a marriage that is just terrible, and then they see you and your husband or your wife, and things look great, and they like, why can't we be like that? What are y'all doing differently that we can do to have our marriage the way that yours is? I think about when hard times come, when difficulties come, navigating those through faith, or through those with faith, is a great way to be able to show people a difference between us and them, and give them something to look forward to. There's a peace that we can live with, a joy that we can have, that the world doesn't have, that people can see in us or should see in us. And when we're living in that way, they want to be a part of it.
We got
Yeah.
another comment from Thomas, and he says, "Consider the song the world's Bible." Then he goes on, say Titus 2:10 of servants, Paul wrote that they may adorn the doctrine of God our Savior in all things. I would like to read. I got the song here that he's talking about, and verse 2 I think is the one that really hits home, and I think that's we sing this at church too. I think a lot of people do. But I just want to read the line because I think Thomas made a good point. We are the only Bible the careless world will read. We are the sinner's gospel. We are the scoffer's creed. We are the Lord's last message, given in deed and word. What if the type is crooked? What if the print is blurred? I'm really glad Thomas brought that to our attention because, you know, I think that's one of the most powerful. The ending of this is one of the most powerful lyrics that I've seen in any song because it always hits me when I sing it, when it says, what if the type is crooked? What if the print is blurred? And everybody understands, how hard it is to read something if the print, is crooked or if it's blurred. And we're not giving a good, representation of Jesus. And that's what the message of the song is. And that's what we got to be careful about, is that's why we study Jesus, and to make sure that we are representing him to others and reflecting that light. We're supposed to be reflecting the light. And, a good mirror is going to be that which is uh, uh, giving you a true representation of the true image, and it's not the false mirrors. I was at a carnival one time and we went into one of those house of mirrors. They had all kinds of funny mirrors, and there was one, Joshua, like that one, that made me look skinny, which I remember telling my wife, we need to like buy this mirror and take it home and put it on our door. That way, I'll feel better about myself when I leave. But um, what we need to do, so to speak, is to read the Bible and then let the Bible reflect the light. Let the light reflect on us and be the true image. Let Jesus be seen. Because if we are not reflecting, if we're one of those false mirrors, then we're giving a false image of Christ, and that makes us a false teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. You think about yes, they watched Jesus, right? We think about how they were looking to catch him, but even when he first came on the scene, what are they? Isn't this the carpenter's son? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
they were aware of who he was. They knew about him and where he came from. When he healed one of the blind men that he had healed, they went to his parents and like, hey, hasn't this guy been blind? And so that not only did they know him, but they knew who his parents were. In Acts chapter 4, and really Acts, I guess, chapter 3 and 4, when Peter had healed the lame man who was laid at the gate, the Sanhedrin, they were aware of this man, right? They had seen him. They knew who he was. And so that just goes to show that it's not always just the Christians that are under the microscope that are being looked at and watched. I mean, that's just the nature of people, right? It's the nature of people, I think, to look around and be observant, which we're supposed to be. God expects us to be observant. And he expects us to watch others as well, because we're to test the spirits, 1 John chapter 4 and verse 1, which means we should be ready to be tested ourselves. And sometimes that testing comes in the form of just simply those who watch our conduct. And so it is something we've got to be careful. We've got to take serious and realize the importance of it in everything that we do.
Yeah, you make a good point, though. We are to be watching others as well. I mean, Ezekiel makes it very clear that, he is a watchman. And the Apostle Paul, reiterates the things that were, it's the same point. Ezekiel was made clear, if he did not warn the people and they continued in their sins, their blood was on him. And of
Acts
course,
20:25 through 27, Paul
Paul
made the
said
same
the
point.
same thing. I am free from the blood of all men, because he had not shunned to declare to them the whole counsel of God. And so we need to be watching it for false teachers as well, and to be able to warn those, that, hey, this is not consistent with what God teaches. Let me tell you what God teaches. And
Mhm.
that's an important point.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those people get pointed out don't want to hear this. One such case, and this is another type of situation. Uh, there are those who want to be watched for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Some people, for instance, and I saw a funny meme on this. There was three girls wearing those jeans, that are just ripped out. And of course, the meme was that these girls just got attacked by a grizzly bear, but they weren't. I mean, it was just they were trying to look sexy, And, there are women who do dress, and the last thing they think of before they leave for church is, when they look in the mirror, they'll say, "Do I look sexy?" And of course, a man who looks upon a woman and lusts after her, he's sinned. And so, there's that as well that we have to consider. There are those who want to be watched, and there are those who watch for the wrong reasons. And that's something that you got to be mindful of as well. The world, you're right. When you were, it was Chris's idea to have this show. I think it's a good one because the world truly is watching, and usually for different reasons, but they are watching.
hmm And they can see the change that is made in our life. First Peter chapter 4, I think, is a great example of that in verses 3 and 4, that where they ask the question, why aren't you running in the same flood of dissipation that you used to run in, with us? As he goes on to talk about how they'll try to speak evil, but you've changed and they've noticed it, right? That
Yeah.
life of yours is different than what it used to be, and people notice it, they see it, and sometimes they'll mock it, sometimes they, other times they wonder, can I have that? Can I make the same type of change? But ultimately, as we kind of mentioned at the very beginning, we need to realize that God is watching. And probably I think about one of the most missed points in the life of Christ, and it's talked about in the subject of giving in
Love it
Luke's
with the
account,
mic.
when Jesus is in the temple and he sees the widow and her 2 mites that she gives. And we talk about how much she gave compared to how much the others, they gave by their abundance. She gave of her means. Um, and the point that I make is, look, what was Jesus doing? He was watching. He was looking. He was trying to pay attention. And whether or not you're catching rats and trying to set them on fire and throw them underneath cars, or do something else, and no one else is seeing it, God is aware. God knows what you're doing and why you're doing it.
And he was also using her to teach. This is how you do it, guys. That's what he was saying. This is how you do it. He does the same thing with the lives of those in Hebrews chapter 11. This is how you do it, guys. And so, we need to be that which the Lord can use to teach others.
Yeah, great point. Josh, some last thoughts?
I'm just intrigued about these rats being thrown under the cars on fire.
I just pulled that out of thin air. Don't worry about it.
Okay, all right. It reminds me of Hebrews 4, where it talks about the word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit, both of joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And then he says in verse 13, there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are uncovered and laid bare to the eyes of him to whom we have an account to give.
Yeah.
So, God, like the song goes, there's an all-seeing eye watching you, and you're not going to escape it. And so we keep listening and watching, or looking and looking to pattern our lives in the way that he wants us to live, so that way he will be pleased with what he sees, and we can hear, well done, good and faithful servant.
Absolutely.
What's amazing about that is think of the data that the Lord has amassed throughout creation, things that he's going to bring to light on the day of judgment. And the reason I bring that up, they're building just south of me these data centers. Google's got one, I think Facebook has the other, and they're building these huge data centers to hold data, and they're massive. It's just huge. But I'm like, you would think God needs a data center, but no, he's just going to remember it.
Yeah. Well, think about everything he forgets for those whose sins are forgiven.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
But still, though, that's pretty amazing, though, that
Yeah, it
he
is.
can, he remembers thoughts. That's wow. That's a lot of stuff from Adam and Eve all the way down to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of things to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I can't even remember a memory verse. You know, I can't even. I have a hard time remembering what year my son was born. So I mean, yeah, you know, that goes to you right there. Who's God and who isn't?
Right. Yeah, right. There, yeah,
Yeah.
great point. Great point. All right. Well, folks, we appreciate everybody tuning in and listening, and those who comment and those who share out the program. Really, we are so appreciative of that. Richard contacted me yesterday and said we had somebody in Uganda listening.
Yeah.
All around the world, we've got folks listening and contacting us. We really appreciate that.
Yep.
So,
We do. We do.
yeah, that's awesome.
And if anybody has a topic that they want us to discuss and study, just let us know, and we will try to. Well, we'll put
Accommodate.
Josh right. We'll put Josh right on it,
That's right. That's
and
right.
he can do his own show on it.
There you go. That's it. All right, folks. Until next time, remember to search the scriptures with Berean spirits.
Uh-oh. Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.